Good afternoon. I'm Holly Schroeder, Chair of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and the meeting facilitator is Taro Bravo from CV Strategies. The audio, video, and chat features of this meeting are being recorded, and it is being conducted in accordance with Governor Newsom's Executive Order N-29-20. To begin, all SAC members and staff are unmuted. Please mute your device until you are ready to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. Then unmute yourself to comment or respond. Committee members should only use the chat feature for meeting management purposes and not use it to engage in any discussion. Members of the public are muted and video is off upon joining the meeting, but will be unmuted for public comments and questions. I will call for general public comment at item 2, and then again for each individual agenda item. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. You have 3 options for those comments. You may indicate in the chat feature at any time during the item discussion that you wish to be called upon. You may write your question or comment in the chat feature, or when public comments open, Tara will unmute all members of the public and you may verbally state your name and indicate that you have a question. Kathy Martin is our timekeeper who will time and advise you when your 3 minutes is up, and then your mic will be muted. Public comment can also be sent via email or mail. Please refer to the agenda for specifics. Any public comments received via email or in writing after 2:30 p.m. today will be posted to the website the next day and becomes part of the record. For each individual agenda item, I will introduce the agenda item and presenter. At the end of the presentation, I will ask the committee for any questions of the presenter. Members are encouraged to use the raise hand feature and otherwise signal verbally and or visually that you wish to be called upon. Please wait to be called upon, and if it appears that there are many questions, I may go in alphabetical order. I will then call for public comments. The committee may then again discuss the item and public comments. Again, we encourage use of the raise hand feature to keep things orderly. Today's PowerPoint was not included in your packet. PowerPoint will be shown during this meeting and will be available on the website. With that, we can do roll call. Thank you, Tara.
All right, Dan Masnada.
Here.
Roy Marson. Roy? Nope. Sandra Cattell.
I'm here.
Stacy Fortner.
Present.
Dennis Ostrom.
Here.
Steve Sly.
Here.
Matt Carpenter.
Here.
Eric Adair.
Yes.
Holly Schroeder.
Present.
And
With that,
sir.
do we have any public comment? Item 2.
I will unmute everyone. Everyone is not locked. Is there any public comment? You may feel free to speak now. Seeing none, we can continue.
Okay, great. Moving to our action items we have our minutes from our March 24th minute, which I hope you've had a chance to review for any comments or corrections. If not, I will take a motion.
Sandra moves approval.
Thank you, Sandra. Is there a second?
Stacy will second.
Thank you, Stacy. All in favor, over to Tara for a roll call.
Dan Masnada,
Yes. Aye.
Sandra Cattell,
Yes.
Stacy Fortner,
Yes.
Dennis Ostrom,
Yes.
Steve Sly,
Yes.
Matt Carpenter,
Yes.
Eric Adair,
Yes.
and Holly Schroeder.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, so next item 3.2, I'll give it to Tara in a moment to lead off, and Rick Vergutz will make a presentation. This is on the monitoring plan, and this is an item that we had asked for more information on this on the monitoring plan going forward. So Tara and Rick, I will hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Rick.
Thank you, Chair Schroeder and Tara. Yes, we did prepare a presentation today, which we're going to go through in a few minutes. And Jeff will be going through the slides. We've tried to capture all the key information for the monitoring program and keep it interesting and brief for your committee. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I'll try to keep it brief. I'm not sure how interesting it's going to be. Do my best. All
Oh,
right.
it's all interesting.
Okay. So topics for this presentation are that I'm going to just briefly touch on the GSP development process, where we are in that. I'm going to describe some of the key elements of the monitoring plan, some examples of the monitoring plan use, and particularly as it relates to the sustainable management criteria. And then, of course, I'm looking for input and discussion from you all as we go forward. So here we are in our process. You've seen this graphic before. We're talking about the monitoring plan here on the stair step for today. The next meeting, we're going to be talking about projects and management actions. And of course, all this is leading toward development of our public draft GSP. So what's the purpose of the monitoring plan? It's to evaluate basic conditions over time in order to demonstrate progress in meeting our sustainable management criteria and demonstrating sustainability in the basin. So important information that is being considered in development of the plan. As you'll note when you review it, it includes a review of the existing monitoring programs in the basin, of which there are many and have been for many years. We're going to talk about monitoring protocols in the plan, data gaps, of which there are some. Where are they? What are they? And what's our approach to filling them? We're going to talk about how we selected the monitoring locations, and then we're going to talk about, as prescribed by DWR, the description of the data collection methods for each of our sustainability indicators. So what are some of the considerations relating to between the monitoring plan and sustainability criteria? So the key thing is that we've got an approach to quantify undesirable results, and it's spelled out in the sustainable management criteria document that we've already reviewed. And some of those considerations include setting minimum thresholds for each of the indicators. And we've specified the number of wells or the percentage of wells, representative wells, that if we exceed the minimum threshold, that could indicate an undesirable result. We've got a GDE evaluation program that's initiated if our triggers are set or our early action triggers are reached. If we have water quality exceedances, it might indicate there's a degraded water quality issue. That's referred to state regulatory agencies that handle that. And of course, if we do exceed or approach a minimum threshold, there's an evaluation that's performed, and that's spelled out in the monitoring plan as well. And again, if we exceed the minimum threshold and if we determine that it's caused by pumping and that an undesirable result is imminent, then the plan calls for initiating management actions or projects to respond to that undesirable result. So what are some of the examples of the monitoring plan and its application and use? I'm going to go through a few examples here. This one is for chronic lowering of water levels, one of our key sustainability indicators. So we're going to collect data from representative wells on a quarterly basis. And some of the considerations that are part of the monitoring plan is that the water levels must be collected with an accuracy of 0.01 feet. That's a requirement from DWR. Our goal is to collect static measurements, meaning non-pumping, not affected by well pumping in that well. Eliminates questions about well efficiency and whether the measurements are consistent from event to event. We want them to be static, and the plan calls for that. Our goal is to eventually utilize monitoring wells rather than pumping wells because of those issues of whether trying to decide whether our measurements are static levels or they're reflecting some amount of pumping or recovery from pumping. So over time, I envision that we would be migrating toward more monitoring wells, but right now it's a mixture of monitoring wells that don't have pumping and pumping wells. So each time we collect information, that data or those data are input into the data management system, DMS. And so this allows us to create reports, annual reports that are required, custom data queries and tables and graphics. There will be some logic programmed into the DMS software to allow us to track where we stand relative to our minimum thresholds, so that we can determine whether we're approaching any undesirable result. So here's a map that shows the distribution of our representative monitoring well network for the alluvial aquifer. You can see the red dots represent the wells that are included in this program, give us pretty good coverage in most of the area, particularly the areas that we think are affected by pumping in the basin. That's a key point. Here's the distribution of Saugus wells, obviously a lot fewer wells. These are very deep wells and we have far fewer to go by, but we've included as many as we can in our monitoring program. I might add that these monitoring wells that you see here that are in the program are also part of the groundwater model, included in that groundwater model that we've talked about in the past. So examples of how the plan is used for this time for GDE monitoring, groundwater dependent ecosystems. So we've got, 10 GDE monitoring wells, and we're going to be collecting water levels on a monthly basis. Perhaps, I'm not sure if we're going to use transducers or not, but ideally that would be the case, electronic data collection methods. And we may collect data more frequently during extreme conditions, drought conditions. So what are some of the considerations that we've included in the plan? Well, first and foremost, we have some monitoring wells that we're relying on out there already, but we need quite a few more. And so the plan calls for installation of additional GDE monitoring wells. And we've talked about this in the past. The second consideration here is that we've got model predicted water levels and we have some historical water levels in a number of wells in our GDE area. But the reality is whenever we install a new well, we're going to probably need to correlate whatever we're measuring in water levels in that well with what we would predict the water levels to have been at that location and translate it to what the minimum thresholds need to be in that well. This is a bit of a variable because it depends on how close we can get to the river when we install these GDE monitoring wells. If access doesn't allow us to get very close and we're some distance away, the water level at that distant location could be different. So we've got to make a correlation and a correction for that. The GDE monitoring data, the water level data, is going to be imported into the data management system. So again, this allows us to create these required annual reports and custom data queries. And it's going to have logic, again, programmed in it so that we can identify water levels that are approaching the trigger levels or our early action triggers. We'll talk more about that later. And again, those are set based on historical water levels. So we'll have plenty of logic built into our program to be able to anticipate when we're getting close to or approaching any of our indicators or triggers. Here is what we've got so far for our monitoring network. There are other wells that we're monitoring now in the alluvium, but these are our GDE monitoring wells that we're proposing. You see in these, the green area is the groundwater dependent ecosystem that we've identified thus far along the main stem and up San Francisco Creek and up Cascade Creek and then along the main stem. And you can see we've got a distribution of GDE monitoring wells in different parts of the GDE area. And one in particular, and I'll point this out, it's difficult to see, this one right here at the I-5 bridge is called GDED, and we're going to spend some time later on talking about that location, but I just wanted you to see on the map where it was. We got some feedback in a previous meeting from you all that there are some potential GDEs and some plant communities that could be associated with groundwater that are outside of that green area that I showed you. And so we are including in our plan to do some additional assessment in that area, a habitat survey, and identify whether monitoring is appropriate or not. And we're calling these upland GDEs for lack of a better term. And previously we talked about in the input we got were that there were some that we showed in the Placerita and Sand Canyons. While we don't believe that these GDEs are likely to be affected by downstream groundwater extraction, we want to confirm this. So we've incorporated that into the plan. So this GDE survey we're talking about in these upland areas include a plant species identification and kind of characterization of the area of that habitat. We're going to look at the available data to determine the degree of connection with the groundwater system in those areas. And could those GDE areas be affected by basin pumping is another key aspect. And then of course, in the end, we're going to evaluate the need for ongoing monitoring and perhaps even installation of monitoring wells in those areas. So we're going to want to talk about whether, how you feel about that and whether that's adequate. We want some input today if possible. Moving on to examples of the monitoring plan used for this time degraded water quality. So data are collected from representative wells, and they're also collected routinely at the municipal water supply wells. And so the considerations in the monitoring plan are that we're going to be relying on existing monitoring data that is being performed by SCV Water and several other agencies for the data that would be used in this assessment. Those samples are collected on varying schedules as defined by the state drinking water program. We're also going to be developing, as part of our GSP, what we're just going to call for now a voluntary water quality sampling program. And this would be a plan that would be developed for selected domestic wells and selected agricultural wells, and it would be voluntary in nature. We need to establish some baseline water quality for those two water well types because we don't have information now and we consider their data gap. Again, we're looking for some input from local non-municipal pumpers who might want to participate in this program. We're probably going to be constraining the wells that we choose to include in the program to be in areas where we believe could be affected by pumping in the basin. And that probably will exclude some of the very high upland areas up in the upper tributaries. But we need to go through an evaluation to figure that out. So the water quality data would be input into the data management system to create these reports and data queries. Again, we would build logic into it so that we had the ability to identify if we're reaching a threshold where there's an undesirable result that needs to be dealt with. Here's a map showing the annual groundwater quality monitoring network for all the wells. The red diamonds are for alluvial wells and the blue diamonds are saugus wells that are in the program. We also have other wells in the red dots that you see distributed around here where water quality samples are collected and would be part of the program. All right, so changing gears a little bit. So how does the monitoring program help the GSA recognize whether or not there's an undesirable result? So for each sustainability indicator, the monitoring data are input into the DMS, as I said. The DMS computes trends relative to the minimum thresholds and triggers that are set for each of the indicators at each representative well. The GSA technical team would review all the monitoring data on a regular basis. And if the thresholds or triggers are being approached, there will be an evaluation. And one of the key questions or a set of key questions involves evaluating whether that condition of approaching a threshold is related to pumping, climate, or both. So that's part of the evaluation that would be done if we approached one of our minimum thresholds or triggers. So again, other considerations for how the monitoring plan helps the GSA recognize whether we have undesirable results. Per the monitoring program, we're going to advise the GSA board of directors on a quarterly basis or more frequently as needed about the monitoring results. And if there is a concern about approaching a threshold or potential for an undesirable result, the GSA board will consider the role of projects and management actions to address that potential undesirable result. There would be a suite of those management actions that would already be a part of the GSP that in a section that you all haven't seen yet, but you'll get a chance to very soon. So how do the monitoring program and the sustainable management criteria work together? So the monitoring and reporting program informs the GSA, the stakeholders, and the Department of Water Resources if we are expecting or have seen undesirable results and how we would avoid them, and whether the GSA is on track to meet the sustainability goal. Over time, as we develop more monitoring information and do more analysis, the GSA is going to better understand if minimum thresholds and GDE triggers are set at the right level. And then it'll allow us to also determine if changes in the monitoring or the thresholds or the GDE triggers are needed or appropriate. It's kind of an evolving plan. It's a living plan. It's intended to evolve over time. Possible changes would be discussed with the GSA board, and then the board would decide whether or not there would be changes that would be proposed to DWR. So after multiple seasons of monitoring under a range of conditions, dry, wet conditions, or extreme dry conditions, we're expecting that there will be times when we want to do some evaluations as we approach our triggers or our minimum thresholds. So we would determine whether additional monitoring wells would be needed or additional studies should be undertaken to better understand what's driving any particular effect that we see out there, whether it's pumping. We might even consider turning off pumping at certain locations and monitoring the response in the alluvial aquifer to see how that affects things. We're going to understand the GDE sensitivity, habitat sensitivity to changing water levels, and whether the trigger should be adjusted. We're going to identify changes that, as I mentioned, should be proposed to DWR for review. The big picture is that over time, the monitoring program becomes better and we become better at identifying whether there are undesirable results or conditions that could affect sustainability. That's the bottom line of the program. So in summary, and this is the last slide for this agenda item, monitoring program is carefully crafted to work alongside our sustainable management criteria that we've set. There's expected to be refinement over time of the monitoring program and also a look at the criteria, if they're appropriate or not. And then we seek your committee's input on the draft monitoring program approach for the draft that is out there now. And with that, I'm sure that you all have lots of questions. Happy to answer.
So yeah, let's go into questions. And I'm seeing hands come up. So Sandra, please, why don't you start off?
Hi, Sandra.
I have to remember to unmute. First of all, this is quite comprehensive, and thank you very much for including some of my requests. I think that, I believe that having monitoring in sand and placid canyons is going to help you see the effect of not only pumping but drought, and you'll be able to delineate them, I believe, much more easily with monitoring wells in those locations. So thank you very much. And I also appreciate the fact that you're going to look for input from local pumpers, because we all know that there are a lot of people in this this area that are not on agency water, and their groundwater sustainability is just as important as the wells that are being used by the agency, the water agency. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Senator.
I have a question. I don't know how to raise my hand here.
right.
Is subsidence being measured at these points when they measure the water parameters?
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that. We have a separate monitoring element for subsidence. I didn't describe it, but it's going to be a combination of, first of all, it's not going to be at the representative wells. We're going to be setting up separate stations for that. So in summary, we're going to be relying on information that's already being collected via the satellite INSAR information for the basin. But that's going to be supplemented with actual real land surface elevation monitoring that would be conducted once a year at benchmark locations that are going to be established at different places in the basin, typically where we have critical infrastructure. It might be a well or wells, but it would also be, for example, at the state water pipeline, or it might be at some other critical spot where we really need to understand if subsidence is occurring. So it's a little bit different monitoring program that we have in mind. We also may choose to install what are called extensometers. These are devices that are installed in wells and in boreholes for evaluating whether there's changes in elevation at different depths, and if there's extension or compression happening at that location, you can actually measure it. So it's a combination of things we're going to be using as part of our subsidence monitoring program, particularly in areas where we expect the biggest changes in groundwater levels.
Okay, and on these monthly surveys, are they going to be picking up a whole history of the recordings, or are they going to just have one dot?
Well, so the monitoring program that's likely to be monthly, and I think we described that in the plan, is for the GDE areas, because we really need to understand what's happening there in a more rapid time frame, as opposed to groundwater levels where we specified that they're going to probably be quarterly. I know that the agency right now is collecting monthly data, and we're going to continue with that. So there'll be a dot, a point at that point in time, but it's going to be recorded and input into the data management system so that we can see the whole historical trend all the way back to as far back as it goes for each monitoring location.
But in between the monthly dots, is there going to be a record or anything?
Well, right now, unless we see that there's a potential concern, like for example, at the I-5 bridge, I'll just take that example. That's a critical spot. We know that we need to maintain surface water flow at that location, some amount of flow. And so we're going to be doing monthly measurements. We'll probably set transducers in our monitoring well at that location. And we've got a surface water gauge at that location already that's going to be recording probably multiple times a day. So all those data are going to be pulled together and put into the data management system.
Okay, there is a way when if you're suspicious or you're kind of not understanding what's going on, that you can get a more concentrated source of data to find out what's going on,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So that's an example at that location where I could envision at certain critical times we'd be out there more frequently and observing what's going on.
Yeah, and Jeff, I don't know if you mentioned it, but we're looking to have data loggers in those wells too that may collect data hourly, and we would download that, say, once a month. And so we'll be able to see a lot of resolution on how the system's operating, Mr. Ostrom.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's a really important part of it. And there are data loggers actually in a number of the wells already. Eventually, we'd love to just have data loggers in all of our monitoring locations.
Dan?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, I've got one comment or suggestion and one question. The comment is, you're talking about getting data from local pumpers. There may still be a group of local pumpers. I forget what the name was. But the lady that was the president of the organization was Judy Reinsma. And I believe it's spelled Reinsma. One or more of the pumper representatives may know her. And she may be able to facilitate getting data from certain local pumpers. I know in the past, they've really been reticent to provide such data. You know, maybe it was a big brother kind of thing, but she may be a good place to start.
That's a great suggestion, Dan. Thank you.
And then the question I've got relates to the Saugus monitoring wells. Was there a reason Saugus 1 or 2 wasn't included? You know, being that they're a little bit easterly and north of any of the other Saugus wells that you'd be monitoring?
Rick, you might be able to answer this better than I can, but I think it's because there's a problem with access to the water level in those wells. I think that when pumps were replaced, there was some problem with the access to them. It's not presently accessible. Do you know, Rick?
You just reminded me, those are the two that had liners installed as part of some
Yes.
Right.
rehab work. Okay. Now I know.
That's right.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's how it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, you know, to follow on Dan's comment about local pumpers, we are hoping that some of the members of this committee could help us in this regard by reaching out to some folks that you know of that have wells, whether they be, you know, agricultural wells or they have other private uses. And we're going to be doing, you know, developing a program for the domestic wells in some locations, so to try to fill that data gap out.
Yeah, and Jeff, let me interject too. In our next meeting with your committee, we are going to talk about projects and management actions a little bit more, and we can talk more about the well monitoring then with the private wells. But yeah, we did want the private well operators on your committee to start to think about that and what options you may see for monitoring. So thank you.
Stacy.
Sure. Jeff, can you tell me what the wells were that you're using for monitoring again? Because I don't have the presentation, I can't look for myself.
Oh,
Can you
okay.
go back and just tell me which wells you're using for monitoring?
Yeah, so let's see, without a map, I know it must have been tough without visual. So there are a bunch of wells, alluvial aquifer wells that are already being monitored for various purposes, water level, water quality, etc. And so we will continue to collect that information and rely on that information, whether it be water levels or water quality.
Are
same
you
thing
using Q2, T7, or U6?
You know, now you know the answer to that, Rick?
I'm looking at I'm looking up the monitoring program right now, or maybe John, if you're on the call, you can help.
There is a table in the monitoring plan itself that includes all of the wells that are being monitored and have been monitored. And you have to go back into that table to see. I refer you to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll Stacy, I'll look at it. I'll look it up right now, and we'll keep going. And when I have it, if it's okay, I'll just jump in again.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? And Tara, I sent you a chat. I'm going to ask you to help out. I'm having some unstable internet. That's why my video's off. So I get a little bit of people cutting in and out.
Got it. I'm here to help.
Thank you. Can you kind of help with this part where we need to go next here?
Yep. So Dan has his hand up still, or did you have your thing answered? You good?
I'm good. That was a leftover. I'll take it down.
I got it.
Oh, thanks.
All right, Stacy, do you still have a question? Are you good?
Yeah, thanks. I lowered my hand. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. All right, John, do you have a question?
I have an answer for Stacy. We do have Q2 and U6 in the that representative monitoring network right now. We had not identified T7 just because it's in between the two of them, and not really all that far from either one. Of course, the agency has been collecting data at that well as one of its production wells, for quite a while. I've seen that data. I've used it in the groundwater model. So I just want to answer that question for you.
Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions from the committee?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place to bring it up, but when you were talking about knowing whether the water levels in a particular well were being affected by drought or by pumping, I have been looking over, if you ever attend an engineering committee meeting, they have the well levels and all in the packet in every meeting. And so I pulled up just to look at the well levels in the last engineering packet. I was looking at specifically Q2, T7, and U6. And even though we are in, we've had less than 3 inches of rainfall this year, and those well levels seem to be particularly high. And so we can't really attribute that to drought, can we? I mean, logic would say that we're in a drought and the well levels are going up, the water levels are going up in those particular wells. So it must be due to pumping that the water levels would drop so drastically. Does that make sense? I mean, we're not pumping, but we're not getting rainfall and the well levels are up. So, I mean, what's the logical conclusion is that it has to be from pumping that the water levels drop so drastically.
You mean in the past, like for example, in the last drought?
Well, no, I'm actually looking at data from October 20th. I'm looking at the engineering report, and I asked her at the beginning of the meeting if there was ever an opportunity where I could share my screen, because I have the engineering report up, and it's actually I'm just looking at those particular levels with the dates, and I wanted to compare the levels in the engineering report with the modeling levels to see if they square. And also, I don't know, can I share my screen, Tara?
Absolutely.
Okay,
So long
I'll
as
stop sharing. I'm not sharing, I don't think. No,
no,
no.
you're not sharing. Let me see. Give me 1 second here.
you see the screen sharing, right?
Yeah, I do. People make fun of me because I have so many tabs open, so I'm going to spare you from looking at all my tabs, so I'm closing them. And let me see. Okay. I still have a lot of tabs open, so nobody judge me.
So let me jump in a little bit on maybe a partial answer to your question. So there's a bunch of factors that we look at in terms of trying to figure out what effect there is of pumping, what their effect of climate is, okay?
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at your screen, I do see it.
Right. So
And
this is U6, and the date is, you can't really see it. Maybe I can blow this up a little bit.
that helps.
So if you look at the date, it says October 20th, and the well levels are particularly high. I mean, they were way down here and now they're climbing back up, but we haven't had an abundance of rain. We've had less than 3 inches of rain. So it's not drought conditions that are causing those well levels to drop. We're in a drought. We haven't had any rain. So the only logical conclusion that I can draw from this is that it's pumping. It's, you know, pumping all the water out of these wells. So if we even go back and look at, oh, what page was it on? Oh, it's over here, T6 or T7. Here's another one. So we're looking at October, particularly high levels again, and still no rain.
So that.
Unless
Yeah.
I'm reading these wrong, but I don't think that I am.
Well,
So-
water levels, okay, so I'm looking at, this is depth to groundwater on the left. So the scale is going up means the groundwater level the water levels are coming up. Is that, am I reading that right? I think so.
Right.
And so the signal that you see there is actually very consistent with what we see in a lot of alluvial wells.
Right.
We
And
saw
I, you
that-
know, I've looked through them and they're all going back up. And that's what I'm saying. We haven't had any rain, and yet the water levels in these wells continue to climb. And you can look at one after another after another.
Yeah, so the thing that, and I don't want to belabor this, but one of the things we look carefully at is what the antecedent rainfall conditions were. What's been happening with rainfall? We knew that we had some higher than average rainfall that happened in 2017 and into 2018. And so that was enough in many places, and in this basin also, for water to cause a rebound in water levels. But now that we're into another extended dry period with unknown amount of rainfall, and as you point out, very low rainfall, I'm expecting those water levels to level off and to probably start dropping again. But it came up because there was some rainfall that occurred after that severe drought we had between 2012 and 2016. You can see that clearly in those water level signatures. The other thing that you can see is what I see is evidence of pumping from nearby wells. I'm assuming those are static measurements. You could see the effects of some other wells pumping in there that are affecting the water levels in that well. That's not unusual. That's to be expected. But the overall trend that you see is reflective of the, you know, conditions in that part of the basin. And that basin is likely going to respond differently than, say, other parts of the basin. And this is what we've seen. This is what we expect. The model that we have, the groundwater model, actually replicates that very well.
I was just going to say that, Jeff, we've modeled this through the end of 2019. You know, we define all the pumping amounts in the model on a monthly basis and all the rainfall and recharge term on a monthly basis. And we're seeing the model predict similar trends and curves like you were just showing us, Stacy. So it's a combination of those things.
Yeah, so to answer your question, it's a combination of data and information. Likewise, in using the model to help us differentiate what's pumping effect versus long-term climate effect. We could also do some adjustments to pumping in a nearby well. Say we shut it down or we go to 50%, and we look to see does that have an effect on the well that's approaching a minimum threshold. So there's different things that we use, data sets that we use to try to help us determine, parse out what's an effect from pumping versus an effect from climate. So that's good news that the water levels are coming back up. I love seeing that.
Yeah, and you'll see, Stacy and committee, on some of the graphs that we've shown in the past, we show the model simulation and then we show the actual measured levels. And we haven't focused in on those a lot, but you know, Jeff, if we have any graphs today that show that, you could highlight that. But there is good agreement.
Yeah. But I appreciate your question and comments, Stacy, because it's not an easy analysis. I'll just say that. There's a lot of
variables.
Yeah, and like I said, the logical conclusion that I was drawing is that the water levels are rising without rainfall, so it must be the pumping and over pumping in some areas that are causing the water levels to drop.
There was some pretty good rainfall at, I believe it was the December 2016, January 2017, if I remember right. Which was something that really caught my eye as I was constructing the model and extending it through 2019. And there may have been one or two events after that in 2017 or early 2018. I'd have to go back and look at the data set again. But they caught my eye. They were there. So
Right, but
there
one
was
or two
some
little
recharge.
events like that isn't gonna pull us out of a drought.
Well, one thing to keep in mind too, Stacy, is long-term, we see the groundwater levels in the basin cycling up and down, but we don't see a long-term decline. And that's really important for our basin. So yeah, we do have these periods where the water level drops. It comes back though. And that's an important thing and a really good thing about the basin here in Santa Clarita.
Thank you. Like I said, I wasn't sure if that was the appropriate time or if we were going to talk about that when later in the agenda when we're talking about water levels. So, or minimum thresholds. So anyway,
Yeah, that's fine, Stacy. We'll move back to that
thank you.
comment.
And Sandra said she also has a well, just flagging for that. I know that's sort of come and gone, but didn't feel like the right time to interrupt. So Holly, are we ready to move into public comment? I don't see any more questions. I don't see any more hands raised.
Okay, then let's go ahead and do that. Move into public comment.
All right, can I get any public comment on agenda item 3.2, the discussion on the draft groundwater sustainability plan monitoring plan, technical memorandum?
Okay, hearing none. This is simply informational, is it not?
That's right, Chair Schroeder. Just informational item only.
Okay. With that then, if there's no final questions,
I
all
see
right, then,
none.
great. Then let's go on. Really want to again thank you, Rick and Jeff, for presenting, and for the efforts of responding to previous comments from the committee as you've been and incorporating those in what you're thinking of around your monitoring plan. Very appreciated. Okay, so the next one, Rick, it's still going to come back to you. And we've had multiple discussions, obviously, about the trigger levels and how that relates to the monitoring programs. We've had multiple discussions in these categories. I believe today our intent is to bring this forward as an action item to decide what those levels are. So Tara, Rick, over to you.
Thank you so much, Holly. What we're going to be doing now is having a conversation and discussion about minimum thresholds and groundwater dependent ecosystem triggers, and really putting together a recommendation for the board in terms of coming together, and then we'll be having a motion, and then we'll be voting on what the SAC recommends. I will get to the question in just a minute, Sandra, but this is a civil discourse on how we all feel about the triggers as they stand right now, what we think might need to change. Yep, there's going to be a lot of discussion about it. And we also have available the slides that we've seen before. So if there's anything you want pulled up, we're ready and willing to pull those up and answer any questions of the staff. So this is also an opportunity to ask staff any questions before you make your decision. One thing to remember is that, as in everything, every public comment gets recorded and put into the public comment section of the plan. So it's not that anyone's opinion will not be heard, everyone's opinion will be heard, but this is where we ask upon the SAC to make a formal recommendation to the board. That's what we're trying to get to today. So let's go ahead and start with Sandra, since she had her hand raised first.
Well, this might be a very simple question to answer. I noticed on page 8 on the second paragraph, when they talked about Bouquet Canyon as an ephemeral stream that flows only in response to storm events. Now, that happens to be the case today because DWP has not been able to honor their contractual releases. So do you call it an ephemeral stream because it is today? Or do you call it a permanent stream because there is a contractual release of water by DWP?
I believe that question is for either Jeff or Rick.
Yeah, Sandra, are you, I might not be on the same page as you. Which document are you?
I'm on the draft groundwater sustainability plan.
Okay, let me get there.
And this is
Thank
not
you.
intended to be a fast moving discussion. We know it's going to take some time for people to pull up things. And you're always
Yeah.
welcome to share your screen if you have something up and open that you can discuss.
Oh, I don't have it open. It's just that some of us who have been working so hard to get those flows going again. I mean, I was part of the group that worked with Tom Lackey and Sharon Runner and Fran Pavley to get the legislation passed, to get that ameliorated. Would like to remind everybody that that is not an ephemeral stream, that it is a permanent stream because of the guaranteed water that should be flowing and hopefully at some point will be flowing.
Sandra, maybe what we could do is just clarify that statement that you're speaking of. And if you could tell us exactly what page it is in which document, we'll take a look at that. I do know that we have included the legally obligated flows that are supposed to be in that creek as releases. We've included that in the model. So it is part of the water budget now. So we're not ignoring those releases.
Okay.
So maybe it's just a matter of how we're describing them.
Okay, I know that, yes, which to me means that that stream then is permanent, just like San Francisco gets releases. I mean, it does also have a natural source, but it also does get releases which make it a permanent stream. So it was just the second paragraph on page 8 that I have on my page.
Yeah, and you're talking about the technical memorandum, correct, that we received in the packet today?
So that you had the link to. Yes. And I know that stream does flow on a daily basis year round, even if in the middle of summer when it's 110 degrees out, it's only a trickle, it actually is still running.
This might be also a bit of issue of where we're talking about, because that text that we wrote might be talking about the conditions within the groundwater basin and inside the basin boundary, which in the Bouquet is pretty far downstream from where those releases occur from the reservoir.
Well, it's talking about stream gauging. That's what it deals with at that time.
Yeah,
Okay.
at the gauging data, there's a gauge just upstream of Bouquet Canyon Bridge. And there's a fair amount of times when it's been recording zero flow. So it's intermittent downstream, but further upstream, closer to the reservoir, sure. Yeah, there's water in there frequently.
Yeah, before 2004, 2005, there were times there was no water because I seem to remember, because I had a horse up in that area and he hates water and we would cross the stream. So I was very aware of the level of that stream.
Okay.
All right,
All right, we'll get that clarified, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you.
we'll come back to that. Stacy had a question? Comment?
You want it behind this? or-
Just a comment, because I went back and I was looking at those things again, and I do see the little blip that you were talking about in 2016, 2017. And even after that, they continued to climb. The well levels continued to climb even after. So there's here, let me, if I just indulge me for a second. If you look at the charts here, this is like this would be your little 2016, 2017 that you were talking about, these little blips here almost at the end. And here we are, they continue to climb and climb and climb. So, and then you look at the expanded view where we're here in February of 21 on T7, and we're higher than we've been in 5 years. So again, not a lot of rainfall. So drought isn't impacting these wells. It must be pumping, right? Am I reading these correctly? I mean, I still don't understand. I mean, I heard what you said, John and Rick, but I still don't see where I would be wrong in my assumption.
In my view, it's both. There has been less pumping from the alluvium in the last few years than leading up to the drought. So that is probably part of what we're seeing here.
So
Again, there's been some intermittent.
So why would we want to set the thresholds so low? We want, and the other thing is, you know, I was looking at over the weekend, looking at the Valley Oak Savanna at McBean and in the Old Road, and all of those oak trees that we thought were dying or dead because of the drought are now sprouting, and they're, you know, they're growing again. So, and yet here we are, no rain, and yet these oaks now appear to be recovering. So this is why I don't think we want to set those thresholds as low as what you have them. And, you know, looking at these well levels, I think this shows that I have a pretty strong argument for that.
Well,
Going to Q2, here's the other one that I was watching.
So maybe we need to clarify what we're doing by setting the minimum threshold at the historic well. Let's talk about that. And you'll notice that there is another level which we call the measurable objective. I'm not sure if that's shown here or not.
That's not shown on this graph, Jeff.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So talking about the minimum threshold for setting it low. All right, we're just saying that we know that water levels can go that low and recover. That's what we're saying. This graph proves it. The model that we've put together shows that that's the case. The available water level data that we have elsewhere shows that that's the case. So it's just basically setting a level that says we're sustainable even with water levels get to that line.
Well, actually not though, because those oaks, the oaks at McBean and the Old Road were dying. We were losing some of our cottonwoods and our oak trees. So okay. I don't think that that's a good place to set those thresholds. I don't think that it's good for the environment, and to the constituent group that I'm representing, we don't feel that that's a good place to be.
Okay, understood. So I guess all I would say is, and we're prepared to talk about this, is that we have set up special triggers for GDEs. And I'm not sure if where you're talking about is within our quote GDE area, but let's just assume for now that it is.
It is.
Okay, so what we're saying is that we don't know to what extent there's going to be a permanent die-off of habitat, okay, below historic lows of water levels. we see, you just shown that actually some trees die and some trees die back, but they don't actually die. They start growing back. Is that a
Well, when
permanent
the water
loss?
levels are coming back, the water
Right.
levels
So
need to come back.
yes, and they do actually. The work that we've seen from the previous monitoring data, the model, and what you've shown shows that the water levels come back. But within the GD area, we've set triggers that are, I think, are above where you're talking about. I'm not sure. We'll have to look. But we've got some trigger levels that for the GD area that we think are protective. Our biologists think are protective for the majority of the GDE area. Remember that the water levels can drop, but then the expectation is that they come back.
Right.
So
we've seen that through history, and the modeling that we've done, which tracks very well with history. The future modeling that we've done that incorporates climate change and differences in pumping in the future as the valley builds out shows that even in the future we have this cyclical period where water levels come down and they go back up on a regular basis. So it's kind of hard for us to dissect those graphs that you're showing, because they're not, they don't have the trigger levels on them, and I'm not sure this is the right venue to get into those. But the modeling that the modeling that we've done, the model's calibrated well. We can see in the future water levels go down, they come back up, and as Jeff mentioned, we've had Tom Barnes and a lot of biologic support that identifies that the habitats can be stressed and they will recover over time too.
We know
I don't
that
remember who the modeler was, or I can't remember who it was, but I remember years ago there was a modeler who said, oh yeah, you can, go ahead and put these bypass wells in and the perchlorate will never expand past them. It'll never make it through. And of course the perchlorate plume did, and the modeler was wrong. So it's possible that the modeling is wrong again. And I don't, like I said, I don't remember who the modeler was, and I hope that you've changed since then and you don't use them anymore. But it's possible to be wrong.
So I think part of this, Stacy, is the issue of, is there a permanent die-off, permanent loss of GDE habitat? That's the issue. I think there's a recognition that when we get to extreme droughts like we just saw between 2012 and 2016, there is going to be some loss of vegetation, at least on a temporary basis. And the issue is it going to come back? Is it going to grow back? We've observed, and I think you even acknowledged yourself, that you even see some of that vegetation regrowing, which kind of proves that when the water levels come back, the plants start growing again. So this is part of what we are expecting to see in an arid environment when water levels are fluctuating as much as they are. And we're just saying, hey, if we are trying to keep the water levels within the historic range is what we want to shoot for. That's what we're trying to say. Because the trees and the habitat are adapted to that range of water levels.
Okay, but we're in an extreme drought now. And if those water levels were to drop, if you were pumping and those water levels were to drop, I'm not sure that we would have the regrowth and the I'm not sure that the ecosystem would come back the way that it is right now, because we are in an extreme drought and they're not pumping very much. But as soon as you green light that and they start pumping and the water levels drop,
I think I can throw something else out there too, what you have not seen yet, but you will see in the next document under management actions and projects. One of the sections in that document is, what is the response if we start approaching a minimum threshold or a GDE trigger? What is going to be the response? And we outline it very specifically. And so I'm kind of curious if you think that that response when we start approaching those levels is appropriate or not.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, having not seen it, I don't know.
But we will get to that point in the next meeting. We're going to have a presentation on it.
Then I would ask
Well-
that we take this discussion and table it until the next meeting. If that's
Actually, let me interject. The process that you outlined, Jeff, with what we do when the trigger levels are reached, we have shared that with your committee a couple times. You might even remember Tom Barnes talking about it. It's where we have the triggers or the early action triggers. Those occur, the triggers are reached, and then there's an evaluation process that takes place. And that's described in the technical document that was released a little while back to your committee. And we did go through that with the committee. So
right.
Yeah, it's in the SMC document.
Right. So I'm going to ask that we table the discussion until we can do a deeper dive into that information that Jeff says is coming.
well,
Dan's been trying to get his hand in here,
Yeah.
so I'm
Oh,
gonna,
sorry, Dan.
yeah, so Dan, why don't you guys chime in here?
Thank you. Couple things. First of all, you know, what's being recommended is a refinement of what the agency and the retailers have been doing for years and decades, and the pumpers for that matter, and operating or pumping within what was at least in the past described as the operating yield of the aquifers. And again, this is a refinement, which is good because it would allow a couple of things I wanted to mention. One is that there will be monitoring. There will be adjustments made in the future. And the one thing we need to understand is that as a committee, we're providing more policy input. As far as technical input, there's been a number of opinions expressed here, or maybe conclusions based on very limited data and expertise, that I would really suggest the committee defer to our consultants and to our staff. If there's some legitimate questions that need to come back at the next meeting and this meeting, that's fine. But again, history's been a good indicator. We have survived. We're not yet in an extreme drought. Staff could characterize where we are. If we have another dry year, we're going to be hitting it. Oh, and the points that you made, Stacy, about the perchlorate contamination, I won't necessarily answer the question about the modeler, whether it's the same one or not that the agency's using. You won't like the answer, but there were a lot of factors at play there. The fact that it took some time to implement the remedy. There was negotiations with the owners and the polluters, if you will, and their insurance companies of the level of pumping from the initial wells that were selected to be treated. And ultimately, you know, there was some compromise there. The agency and the retailers wanted higher levels. Perhaps that in combination with a more timely implementation would have helped. But again, monitoring the perchlorate situation is an ongoing thing, and the agency and its consultants are reacting accordingly, along with working with Whitaker Burmite. So all I'm saying is we need to be careful about how we characterize that, because it wasn't necessarily the modelers screwing up. Again, the modelers that were used then and now have the expertise to really help us, and arbitrarily raising the minimum levels based on opinions or partial information is not a good way to go. However, monitoring and adjusting moving forward, as has been suggested by staff and the consultants, is the way to go. Thanks.
And Jeff, can you address whether or not that information is critical to making the decisions we're talking about today?
I don't think so, because as Rick pointed out, we've already presented that information in the sustainable management criteria section in terms of what the response would be. So
Pull that up,
in the document itself, you mean?
or wherever we're addressing it, so that way we can say, not only did we address it, but this is it.
If you want to take a few minutes to, so we can find it.
No problem. Is there anyone
Rick,
else
I don't know, do
back
you
while
have,
we're waiting on that piece?
Yeah,
Perhaps I
I'll
could
need
have-
I'll need a minute to locate it.
Yeah.
So
Rick,
why
if you'll
don't,
look for it and I'll continue to answer.
yeah, why
questions.
don't we keep going and I'll find it. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. How about anyone else? Have an opinion, have a thought? There's-
Well, I for one, I'm from industry and I've done some modeling, and this one here looks very rational, realistic, and very doable. And I'm just proposing that if the place where the trees were was on the model, that the model would probably reflect it, would reflect why the trees died and all that, but I think it's, we have to be aware that you can't just infer things that are off the model points, and so there's all kinds of pockets and everything under the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dennis. And Jeff, those trees and items were on the model, correct? Or were included?
Well, if I understand where she's speaking of, and John, I think, concluded, yes, they are. We modeled the entire alluvial aquifer water levels, including that area.
But was it like a point on the grid that you actually monitored? Like a finite element or a finite difference?
Yeah, it's a finite element model. So it is the whole basin, each aquifer is broken out into a grid. And so, within plus or minus 250 feet, we've established criteria for that part of the grid. So it just depends
I mean,
on.
yeah. See, the point is though, is that you probably misrepresented that area with the permeabilities, and there may be a big rock down there, or like a Mint Canyon, for any kind of a geologic thing that you didn't consider. This is Southern California is not a homogeneous geologic piece. A lot of people do not understand how crazy the geology is here.
That's a good point, Dennis.
It is.
There is obviously uncertainty in our analysis and in the model. And that's why we're trying to capture as much as we can in the monitoring program, putting monitoring wells in the appropriate places, and a good monitoring frequency. And then as we go, we're learning based on how the aquifer responds to rainfall or lack of rainfall, and pumping as well. And so we constantly are improving that model.
But I would just say kudos to the person that spotted that. But I don't think it takes away from the approach and from what you're coming up with, because I in my own mind, I've been trying to pick it apart. So.
Rick, are you back because you found it?
I am, and I'm just about to flip screens here. So, oh, I see I have one more thing to do. I apologize. But give me just a minute. I'm going to have to switch computers, but I have, Tara, the February draft sustainable management criteria tech memo that we released to the committee, where we outline that process. And we repeated the process in the monitoring program that we recently distributed to your committee. So you did see it in February. You're seeing it again. And So perhaps what I can do is just share share what was sent out Monday. Let me switch screens here. I apologize. I'm in the office. I've got 3 computers running and they're not linked. So I'm sorry. Let me get it up on my screen. Just give me a minute.
You're great. All right, well, he's pulling that up. Do we have any more sort of one-off comments before we kind of get into this next piece?
Gonna do public comment.
We're not doing public comment yet, Stacy. We'll need to
Oh, I
actually,
thought you were
yeah.
moving to the next.
No.
Okay.
We're still in committee discussion. That won't happen until after Rick has shared the piece. We've kind of gone over that. And then there's also the discussion of we need a motion on the floor and then we can have public comment.
Okay. Almost there, Tara.
Rick, I do have a slide from an earlier presentation that we gave in February. Considerations when triggers are reached, if you want me to show that.
I think I've got it, but yeah, maybe we'll use that one, Jeff.
Well, I'll just show it and then you can decide if you're showing it. Okay, right
I beat you to it. So these are the process steps. And again, we shared these with your committee in February. They're repeated in this plan though. And so this is the evaluation process. So like Jeff talked about the triggers. We've got a couple triggers that are a couple feet higher than the historic lows. Others are set at the historic lows. When those are reached, we will conduct an evaluation. We'll know that those are reached because we're monitoring the groundwater, we have data loggers, etc. So these are the questions that will be asked. And let me zoom in a little bit. And Jeff, why don't you run through these and I can scroll the screen.
Well, okay, so the first step is this evaluation process. And so you can see numbers 1, 2, etc. And these are questions that we're just going to try to better understand what's happening, right? So is the affected river segment supported by surface water flow from the WRP discharge? And so is there some change in the WRP discharge? And as long as there's, that segment is flowing in part because of the water reclamation plant discharge, if it's got surface water supporting the plants, then we're not as worried about what the groundwater levels are doing. So that's why that question. And then the next question is the historic low groundwater level already below the tree shrub rooting depth? We've got some locations out there where we know that groundwater levels can go quite deep, as a result of drought and as a result of other fluctuations climatically. And they can go more than 30 feet, way below where the rooting zone is for the plants. So that's one other thing that we look at. Number 3 is, well, will the GDE survive a temporary loss of access to groundwater? That depends on the season, how long that occurs. The length of time that the plants are exposed to less than optimal water is really kind of critical. If we're below the historical low and that lasts for very long, then there's a real risk of causing permanent loss. So we're concerned about that. Has the action trigger been reached often in recent years? And if so, and if we've done our evaluation and the GDEs are still thriving or still functioning without apparent impact, that might tell us something that informs us for now and in the future when we see similar conditions. And that's kind of one thing that we are expecting, is that in the future, we're going to see these repeated cycles of drought and low water levels. Do the plants survive? Is there any obvious evidence of loss? That's part of the data that we're going to be evaluating. Are the declines in groundwater levels resulting from pumping? Key issue. And again, we outlined here the process by which we might evaluate that. That's one of the things we're responsible for. We're not responsible, the GSA is not responsible for mitigating for drought. And that includes GDEs, by the way. We are responsible if it's found that pumping is responsible for it, or even partially responsible. There is a responsibility to manage it, especially if water levels don't come back after the drought is over. Has new information been obtained that can be used to refine the trigger level? Is the trigger level too low, as Stacy points out? Is it not protective enough? Do we see too much die-off? That'll be something that'll be evaluated. Or, as she pointed out, does the vegetation return after the water levels come back up? And they will come back up based on the work that we've seen and based on the pattern we've seen historically.
Right.
I think that's it.
That's,
of course, this culminates in a report that's generated on all this that's submitted to the board for review in terms of whether there's additional action required.
Yeah, it's a good summary, Jeff. We've worked hard to get to this point. And we've got what we think is a real good plan above and beyond what other GSAs are doing to make sure that we're mindful of the groundwater dependent ecosystems.
All right, thank you so much. Stacy, did you have any additional comment to that?
Yeah, I just went back through my notes and I looked, and when we went over this in February, I noticed that both Sandra and I think there was one other person in public comment that mentioned the Valley Oak Savanna, and that we were concerned that you were only looking, and I'm reading from my notes here and they're scribbly, but that you were only in that paragraph above. If you want to scroll up just a little bit, it mentions pumping, and it says that a little more. Anyway, that we raised the concern that you were only looking at the GDEs right along the river, and that there wasn't a lot of attention paid to the Valley Oak Savannas. I'm just reading from my notes.
And Rick, do you want me to speak to the process of sort of developing this particular report?
Sure, Tara.
So what we did, Stacy, was actually transcribe the entirety of the discussion. And this is reflective of the actual transcription of the recording. So anything that was mentioned is reflected very specifically in both this report and then additionally into my public comment report as well. So anything here is it's not based on like my notes. I didn't take notes. I transcribed very specifically exactly what was said and then exactly what was responded back from staff.
Thank you for doing that.
I guess I would add, Stacy, that in the next document, we go beyond just what this evaluation would be and what's going to be in the report to the board. We actually outline some specific actions that the GSA board would consider. And so you get an opportunity to see if those are protected.
Thank you, you guys. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Matt, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. I'm a little troubled by some of the confusion that we have, and it's not, not pointing fingers or anything else. I think it may just be that we haven't developed a full understanding of the issues. But when I hear concerns about different vegetation communities to drought or pumping, to Dennis's point, not all of these communities are created equal. And it may be that maybe ESA needs to help provide a little bit more education and information about how these plants depend on water. We know they all depend on water. What species rely on groundwater, and what species are more dependent on precipitation that infiltrates through the ground, through their root zone? Because I would hazard to say that vast majority of the vegetation in the basin relies on the latter, which is infiltration and water that's actually stored in the soil pores, what they call antecedent moisture, and is in and around their root zone. And when it doesn't rain for a while, those plants tend to die out, even if they're, tens of feet from the groundwater table, and they don't tap into the groundwater table at all. So perhaps ESA could better delineate that for us so that we're not kind of going back and forth over valley oaks and cottonwoods, because they're completely different and they live differently in their positions in the landscape within the basin. And I think that's why ESA delineated the GDE areas the way that they did, because they knew that groundwater was shallower and the types of plants that were there are the ones that ordinarily entirely rely on groundwater. And I think that might help narrow down some of the issues a little bit. So that's my comment.
And let me ask a question too. So the valley oaks and cottonwoods, if we do look into this more with ESA, are these within the GDE monitoring area, Stacy, or are they outside of it?
I believe it's in the GDE, and I know that the oaks do rely on groundwater, so but I do believe it's within the GDE. But you guys will better answer that, because when I look at the maps and I zoom in, they get all pixelated and difficult to read.
Let me summarize really quickly what ESA did. So they started with a massive database of plant communities that are commonly associated with groundwater. It's called NCAG. It's a statewide database of all kinds of plant species that have been cataloged, and specifically showing where they are in this basin. There was an effort to go through it and verify that in fact those plant species were present. So ESA biologists did go out and at that level did a screening. Okay, is it perfect? Is it did they cover every single tree? I doubt it, but there was an effort made to do a field verification. The next step was to take a look at, okay, where is groundwater? Is groundwater within 30 feet of ground surface at any time in history? We used the monitoring data that we have. We used the groundwater model that we had to look at different areas, and basically made a cut based on that 30-foot depth to groundwater to say, okay, if we think if there are the plant species that were identified in that database that they verified are in areas that are below, that are in areas where groundwater is below 30 feet, we excluded those potential GDEs from consideration. And so that's what resulted in that green area that you've seen on the maps as the GDE area that we're monitoring. So the plants and communities that are outside of that, for the most part, except in that upland area that I described earlier, the groundwater levels are below 30 feet below ground surface at all times. The roots can't access it. So it is the GDE area. That much work has been done to confirm that. Do we know exactly what species are in those areas and where, when you talk about the oaks, all I can say is if it's within that GDE area, we're concerned about any of the plants that are in there. So whether it's oaks or whether it's cattails or anything else, willows. So that's the process we went through. I think that's pretty appropriate, responsible. Could more be done in the future? Sure. You know, and we've recommended as part of our program to do a habitat survey in the upland area in a couple of those areas where there was questions about whether those plant communities are associated with groundwater. So within 30 feet of ground surface.
And Jeff, that would be to do more habitat study would be some of those studies we could do in management actions in that part of the plan. We are, as you previously said, we're doing some additional monitoring of, you know, in some of those upland areas as part of the plan you guys laid out in the previous item, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
go ahead. Somebody was jumping in. I thought it was Rick. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, yes, you're right.
So I feel a little bit like, you know, I mean, we maybe this is a little bit to, I think it was Dan's point is, you know, we've got our you know, our experts here have been working with this a while. So Tara, I feel like I feel like we're getting really in the weeds here when this group is supposed to be advisory and is supposed to be, you know, setting sort of policy direction. So can you help us navigate back up to, you know, to the discussion we need to be having today?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Holly. So moving forward, I actually don't see any more hands unless there's additional comments that nobody's raised or anything in terms of general policy. Okay, and now it's time for public comment on this particular agenda item.
Okay, please proceed. Is there any public comment? Again, sorry, my internet just keeps cutting in and out.
Okay.
Sometimes you guys sound like you're underwater yourselves.
Only in terms of my workload.
Yeah, well, we're talking through a robotic voice. So is there any public comment? Tara's unmuting or making it so everybody can unmute if anybody wanted to comment or raise a hand. Seeing none. This is an action item, Tara?
Yep, it's time to call for a motion.
Okay, then we would be, take my glasses here, asking for a motion. Would we say to approve the proposed minimum thresholds and ecosystem triggers?
Yes.
GD, that would be the appropriate. So I would ask for a motion from somebody to move forward on that. Don't everybody unmute at once. Is that everybody frozen maybe because of my computer? Sorry.
No.
I'll
Point
go
of
ahead and
clarification,
move that we approve.
Can I
Dennis
ask?
Ostrom.
That was Dennis. Thank you, Dennis.
There will be time for discussions. Stacey.
Eric seconds.
Eric seconds. Thank you, Eric. Yes, so this is where we open up based on the motion for discussion. Please raise
I
hands.
just
Or
need a point of clarification. So the vote, what we're voting on now is to keep the minimum thresholds of where they were in 2016, 2017? Is that, or are we 2 feet above that? What are we voting on?
Jeff,
clarify?
Yeah, I'll clarify. So we've got several sets of thresholds to consider, but the ones in particular that have been most important and discussed the most are for chronic water level decline as one of the indicators. We have proposed a minimum threshold at the future projected low water level. And that's because according to the groundwater model and all the data that we have, the water levels are stable at that point under the operating plan and under future climate conditions, including climate change. Water levels do not continue to drop, they actually recover. And so we think that that's responsible to set the levels there. For the GDE areas, we've said, let's set the trigger levels, we're calling them GDE triggers, for everywhere except the I-5 bridge. Let's set them at the historic low water level, okay? And for the I-5 bridge area, that's a special case because we're concerned about sensitive species in the river there. Let's set an early warning trigger that's 2 feet above that. With the goal, and this is spelled out in the plan, that we want to maintain flow, surface flow in the river at that point. some amount of flow. And so that trigger could be adjusted to make sure that we maintain a certain amount of flow at that point. So that's what's in the plan right now, those things that I just described. Did I get that right, Rick?
That sounds right, Jeff.
All right, does that, Dan?
There we go. I just wanted to make the comment, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, just so we understand as a committee what the distinction is, what's being proposed as to what's historically been done, so we can, so we can acknowledge what improvements we're suggesting here, is that it's based that the criteria is based on projections that include climate change. So it's not just historical data, but it's utilizing the historical data along with climate change projections to make the projection for the criteria, and then the addition of the GDE levels. And those are the two additional components over and above what's been historically done. And Jeff or Rick can correct me if I'm wrong or if there's something else that they should add.
I'd only clarify that for the GDE considerations for the triggers that we're talking about, it is historical levels without any factors for climate change. We're saying that the plants are adapted to the historical fluctuation, and that seems to be a reasonable place to set our threshold at historical level. Now, for the chronic water level decline, we're saying we have considered climate change in that scenario and future pumping and full build out of a basin when we set those thresholds.
And then Stacy, did you have any additional questions?
Ma'am.
All right.
So those are good clarifications, and I really appreciate it, including the points, Dan, you were making. So Tara, if there's no other questions or comments from the committee, I think we go to a vote.
Yep. Dan Masnada,
Yes.
Sandra Cattell,
Yes.
Stacy, also Sandra's cat, yes.
She gets 2 votes.
Porter,
Oh, did you call me, Tara?
yes.
No, I'm voting no.
Dennis Ostrom,
Yes.
Steve Sly,
Yes.
Matt Carpenter,
Yes.
Eric Adair,
Yes.
Holly Schroeder.
Yes.
Motion passes. The
Okay.
recommendation will be to continue forward.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's a big step on what we've been asked to do as a committee. So thank you all for that. But our work is not done. We go into the next stair step of the plan, using again the imagery of the chart that Jeff and Rick have showed before. And we're just going to, Rick, I think, is going to give an update on sort of those next steps with the projects and management actions and the memo associated with that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Schroeder. And it's a quick update, and it's been a long meeting today, but productive. So a couple of things we just wanted to make sure are on your radar. We do have a regular SAC meeting on the 19th, and the topic of that discussion is going to be the draft technical memorandum on projects and management actions. And that will go into some detail about the nature of projects, the nature of management actions that are on the table if it appears that we may be headed towards undesirable results. And I just wanted to give your committee a heads up. We do plan to put some projects in it that we think the GSA could support, but are not required by the regulations. And those are some recharge projects. And we're still finalizing our list, but we're looking at potential recharge projects south of Castaic Lake, possibly some of the recycled water recharge projects that were looked at in the older recycled water master plan. possibly recharge in the Eastern Basin, but that's a little bit iffy, but we're looking at that. Dirk had even mentioned to me the other day, we might be looking at projects near Placerita Canyon that could possibly take advantage of a potable water line that SCV Water has in the canyon. And so we're working on it. We'll get you that tech memo probably Wednesday next week, and then we'll talk about it the following week. And that's all I had on the update, Chair Schroeder.
Any questions from the committee on that? Okay, are there any requests for future agenda items? All right, then if there's nothing further, Tara, anything I'm missing?
Nope. We can
Okay,
adjourn.
then with that, we will consider ourselves adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks,
So long.
everybody.
Appreciate the support.